I want to speak quickly to the elections that just took place in Venezuela. We applaud the Venezuelan people for their participation in the July 28th presidential election. We commend their courage and commitment to democracy in the face of repression and in the face of adversity. We've seen the announcement just a short while ago by the Venezuelan Electoral Commission. We have serious concerns that the result announced does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people. It's critical that every vote be counted fairly and transparently, that election officials immediately share information with the opposition and independent observers without delay, and that the electoral authorities publish the detailed tabulation of votes. The international community is watching this very closely and will respond accordingly.
Venezuela's incumbent president, Nicolas Maduro, has claimed victory in a highly contentious election over the weekend. After hours of delays in announcing the results, Maduro's loyalists on the National Electoral Council claimed he secured more than 51% of the vote. His main opponent, Edmundo Gonzalez, apparently won 44%, but opposition groups say that tally does not reflect the actual results and that their polling shows Gonzalez is the real victor. Other nations have also held back in recognizing Maduro's victory. In addition to the country's recent history with voter suppression, the results were announced before votes from 30,000 polling booths nationwide were counted. There are growing international calls for a transparent, independent review of the election. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was among the international officials to express doubt, saying he has, quote, serious concerns that the result announced does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people. Protests have started in the streets of Caracas. You're seeing video now from our CBS News correspondent Lily Luciano. She and her team were forced to don protective vests and gas masks as police and protesters clashed on the streets nearby. Ryan Berg joins me now. He's director of the Americas program and head of the Future of Venezuela initiative at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much for being with us. So, are the calls of what's the foundation of these claims that the election was rigged?
Well, good evening, John. It's great to be with you. I think the fundamental point to make here is that the regime took hours, even hours past when it said it was going to announce the results, to announce any kind of results. When it did announce results, it said that they were both irreversible as well as showing a victory for Nicolas Maduro. But what the regime had done before that cast quite a bit of a lack of credibility on these elections, which is to say, stealing many of the ballot boxes at polling places and not allowing the opposition, which had put together a very large coalition of witnesses at each of these polling places, to actually look at the vote tallies from each of the polling places. It is part of national law in Venezuela that each polling place is supposed to produce a final tally. They did not do that, and the regime has not allowed any of those final tallies to be seen. The opposition was able to make away with some of those tallies before the regime was able to get their hands on them. And what the opposition is saying, as well as many credible pollsters who have done exit polls, showing a massive landslide victory for the opposition. However, there was this long waiting period, a lot of doubt, and then the regime seemed to come up with some numbers out of thin air without actually proving with any kind of paper trail those numbers. And so that's the fundamental crux of the problem.
Can anything be done, Ryan?
Well, every country that has cast doubt on the validity of this vote has said that they want transparency. They will recognize Maduro as the president of Venezuela if he shows transparently that he won the election. The fact that the regime hasn't done that yet has made many who are asking for this transparency to feel like this has been a highly rigged election. And you can see that in the results. You just showed some videos of Venezuelans spontaneously pouring into the street to protect their landslide vote for the opposition. Much of this is driven by the indignation that the regime would simply make up a number or fabricate a number out of thin air. And so I think we're going to see days now of protests, again, driven by indignation about the way that this election was handled by the Maduro regime.
And as a final question, Maduro came into power in 2013, and under his government, Venezuela has seen this mass exodus. Just to give you the numbers quickly, U.S. Customs and Border Protection said that there were only 80 Venezuelan migrants at the border in 2014. Within the first 8 months of 2024, 217,000 Venezuelan migrants came through. How much of that can be laid at the foot of Maduro's policies, that exodus?
Almost all of it, John, because the problem here is that people have lost hope. This election actually rebuilt a lot of that lost hope. The expectations for this election were astronomical, and I can only imagine what the street feels today to be let down once again, not because they didn't come out to vote and express their right to vote, because the regime likely stole another election from them in a series of stolen elections. So what we expect to see in the coming months is another outpouring of migration as people start to lose hope that they can make a life for themselves in Venezuela.
Ryan Berg from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Venezuelans are dying in huge amounts.
Venezuela was once the richest country in Latin America. It still has the world's biggest oil reserves. But 20 years ago, Venezuelans voted for socialism. They elected Hugo Chavez. Some Americans were excited about that. Model Naomi Campbell visited Chavez, calling him a rebel angel.
This is you and Hugo Chavez. Oh, Michael Moore! Michael Moore!
Really?
he says, help me write my speech.
He is one of the most important forces we've had on this planet.
And even today, as Venezuela collapses, many Americans say, don't blame socialism.
Actually, blaming socialism for Venezuela's riches-to-rags story is grossly misleading.
Yes, Venezuela is going through an insane political crisis right now, but it's not clear that that crisis has anything to do with their socialist policies.
This popular video, The Collapse of Venezuela Explained, never once mentioned socialism.
Oil prices plummeted in 2014, and Maduro failed to adjust.
Media personalities suggest only conservatives say socialism destroyed Venezuela.
If you follow conservative media at all, you may have seen it frequently painted as the inevitable, dire consequences of a socialist government.
The problem isn't socialism, says John Oliver.
It's a story about epic mismanagement.
But mismanagement is what happens under socialist governments. It always happens, because no group of central planners is wise enough to manage an entire economy. Even if they have good intentions, the socialists eventually run out of other people's money. The socialist solution then is to print more. That caused massive inflation.
The nation's failed economy is expected to hit 10 million% inflation this year.
When business owners raised prices to keep up with inflation, government often took away their businesses.
¿Y este edificio?
Es un edificio que tiene comercio privado de joyería.
Expropiese.
This man just had his business taken. Socialists say government can run businesses better than greedy owners who just want profit. And even though that led to tyranny in Venezuela and China and Russia, Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, Cuba.
There are plenty of socialist countries that look nothing like Venezuela.
When I talk about democratic socialism, I'm not looking at Venezuela. I'm not looking at Cuba. I'm looking at countries like Denmark and Sweden.
Oh yes, those countries do have bigger welfare programs than America does. But they are not socialist. They make a point of saying that. Here's Denmark's prime minister.
Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy.
Not only that, lately they've reduced government control of their economy. They privatized the national phone system and the railroads, and they sold Copenhagen Airport to a private company. It's the same story in Sweden.
We did have a period in the 1970s and 1980s when we had something that resembled socialism, a big government that taxed and spent heavily. And that's the period in Swedish history when our economy was going south.
So Sweden reduced government's role too. They even instituted school choice. The Scandinavian countries that progressives call socialist successes, not only are they not socialist, They're moving more toward capitalism. The silver lining in Venezuela's collapse is that most Venezuelans who escaped their country's socialism do understand what went wrong. In Florida, reporter Gloria Alvarez asked Venezuelan immigrants,
"What do you think about socialism?"
That doesn't work.
So no se lo recomendaría a nadie.
Well, it's never going to work. It's never going to work.
Do you think that people, once they get out of Venezuela, do they understand that the problem is socialism?
I think that a great percentage of them do. The problem is a socialist system that they tried to make work, but that has never worked and will never work.
It will never work. As Ludwig von Mises wrote, the champions of socialism promised the Garden of Eden, but planned to transform the world into a gigantic post office. Every man a subordinate clerk. I wish progressives understood that. Since they don't, tragedies like Venezuela will happen again and again.
Suppression, suppression. Tally, tally. Apparent, apparent. Validity, validity. Spontaneously, spontaneously. Indignation, indignation. Fabricated, fabricated. Exodus, exodus. Crux, crux. Astronomical, astronomical. Repression, repression. Adversity, adversity. Tabulation, tabulation. Incumbent, incumbent. Contentious, contentious.
If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date with future videos. Thank you for watching.